Hey Finxters, welcome back. Now in the previous video we learned the different steps involved in data pre-processing. Now let us have a look at the different libraries that we need in order to perform data pre-processing. The first library that we would need is the Numpy library. So let us import the Numpy library. Import numpy and then as np. Therefore, instead of calling it numpy every time when we need it, we can use the short form np instead of numpy. Now, why do we need numpy for data pre-processing? This is because numpy is a Python library that allows you to perform numerical calculations. Think about linear algebra. NumPy is the Python library for it. It's about matrices and vectors. At the heart of the NumPy library is a basic data type called NumPy array. Now, while dealing with machine learning models, we have to work a lot with arrays. That's why this library is so important. Now, the next library that we need is the pandas library. So let us import the pandas library as import pandas as pd. Just like np, which serves as a short form for numpy, pd serves as the short form for pandas. Now, why do we need the pandas library? The pandas library is the fundamental high-level building block for performing practical and real-world data analysis. The pandas library will not only allow us to import the data sets but also create the matrix of features and the dependent variable vector. Now the next library that we need to import is Matplotlib. So let us import that. Import Matplotlib, and then we need a particular module from within the Matplotlib library named as pyplot. So we are going to say import matplotlib dot pyplot, and then just like before we are going to name it, or we are going to use the short form plt for this module. So why do we actually need the pyplot module of the Matplotlib library? This is because Matplotlib allows us to plot some awesome charts, which is a major requirement in machine learning. So that's why we need the pyplot module of the Matplotlib library. Now there's another library that we would be using quite frequently in this course. This is known as the scikit-learn library. However, I'm not going to import it as of now. This is mainly because we would require certain modules from that library. Therefore, it will not only help me to explain things better by importing the particular module when we actually need it, but it will also help you understand things in a more better and structured way. So we are done with our first step, which was to import the necessary libraries. Import the necessary library. It's now time to have a look at how we can import the data set that we need to feed into our machine learning model. Before we actually import the data set, let us have a look at the data set. So this is the data set that we are going to import. Now let us consider that this data set is a catalog of certain company which tries to identify or promote its products in 3 countries, and then it wants to find whether the product was purchased or not. Therefore, as you can see, we have 3 columns: the country, age, salary, and then finally whether the product was purchased or not. So that is represented by the purchased column. So please note that we are going to use this data set throughout our course. So I suggest that you download the following data set that you can see on the screen from the link you can find on the description given below. Okay, so since we need this data set, which is in the form of a CSV file, we need to copy it and then paste in our project. Right click on the project and paste. Okay, now we have the required CSV file. Now let's try and import this data set. Now that we are importing the data set, we need to import it in a variable which I'll name dataset. Now this variable will read all the values of the data set and it will create what we call a data frame. So it will create a data frame and contain exactly the same rows and columns and values present in the data set. You can think of a data frame as a two-dimensional object like a table which contains rows and columns. Therefore, in order to create the data frame, we need to call a certain function of the pandas library, which is known as read_csv. So let's do that. PD, which helps us to call the pandas library, and then we need the function read_csv. And within this function, we need to pass the exact name of the CSV from which we want to pull the data. So that would be data.csv. Okay, we have now successfully created our data frame. The next thing that you have to do is to create two new entities. The first is the matrix of features and the second is the independent variable vector. So do you now remember these entities as we discussed them in the previous video? If not, let us again have a look at them. If you look at this data set, you can see that the columns country, age and salary are independent variables, while purchased is a dependent variable. Why? This is because the values in the purchased column help us to identify the final output. So the final output is directly dependent on the purchased column. So we can say that this column is our dependent variable vector, while the columns country, age and salary will form the matrix of features. Now I'm going to call the variable x, which contains the matrix of features. Then we need to access the dataset dot iloc. Now iloc is an indexer for the pandas data frame, which allows us to select particular rows and columns based on their index or position. So dataset.iloc, and now we have to specify the index that we need in our matrix of features, which is represented by the variable x. Now I'll help you with a short trick here. What you actually have to do is select all the values except the last column. So what I'll do is initially select all the values. To do that, I'll use colon. Now this helps me to select the entire data set or all the values present in the data set. Now my next task is to eliminate the final row or the final column, that is the purchased column, which happens to be our dependent variable vector. So how would I do that? In order to do that, I would use a comma and then a colon. Now when I use the colon, it means I want to select all the values from the index specified on the left hand side of the colon to the index on the right hand side of the colon minus 1. So that would mean if I say 2 to 3 or maybe 2 to 4, that would mean I want to select all the values from the second index to the third index. So I hope this was clear. Now what we need to do is to select all the elements present except the ones which are present in the last row or in the last column. So in order to do that, we have to say -1. So what this will do is select all the elements except the last column. So this is what x will contain. Now it's time to create our dependent variable vector. I'll call it y equals dataset.iloc. And now, can you guess what I have to do here? Okay, let me tell you. We have our colon and then, as you guessed it right, we need to select the last column and then we need to select the last index. That would be -1. Great, we have now successfully created our matrix of features and the dependent variable vector. Let's try and check the values. X, print, y. Now what I missed here was to extract the values. In order to extract the values from the indexes, we have to use dot values. Similarly, for the dependent variable vector, we would say dot values. Now we are good to go. And now let's check if we have successfully extracted the exact data that we need in the particular variables. So let's execute our code, right click, run data preprocessing. And there we go. As you can see, we have successfully extracted the exact data that we needed. So congratulations. You now know how to create the matrix of features, and you can also create the dependent variable vector. You have also learned how to import the necessary libraries that we need in order to perform data pre-processing. That was it for this video. Please stay tuned for the next video where we are going to learn the next step of data pre-processing, which is to identify the missing values and then handle them properly.